I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to our program, Rivers of Living Water, a program about how to grow in holiness and have an intimate relationship with God. Jesus said in John chapter 7, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink, and out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Now here's our moderator, our hostess, Mary Schwarz, who will introduce a very interesting guest today.
Hello there. Yes, I'm Mary Schwarz, the hostess, and with us today is Dan Burke, who is the publisher of the National Catholic Register, an excellent Catholic newspaper, and author of a new book called about prayer called Into the Deep, Finding Peace Through Prayer. So we're going to talk about Dan's book today and learn how to do what Dan calls discovery prayer, which is a very ancient and highly respected way of praying that can enable us to have an intimate relationship with God, grow in holiness, and it also prepares us for the gift of contemplative prayer. But first, I'd like to ask Dan some questions about himself. Dan, in addition to being the publisher of the National Catholic Register, which, by the way, you can read online, Dan is the founder of a website called spiritualdirection.com and the Avila Institute. Dan, you seem to be a Catholic entrepreneur.
Well, my goal is to say yes whenever I hear God speaking, and hopefully I'm hearing correctly. And yeah, there's a lot going on. Well,
tell us about how you came to start spiritualdirection.com and the Avila Institute and what they are.
Yeah, spiritualdirection.com I started in 2009. My struggle was I was looking for faithful Catholic spirituality materials on the web, and I ran across more kind of syncretistic New Age stuff than I did authentic Catholic spirituality, and so I saw a real need, so I determined I should create a site. Initially, I thought maybe 20 people would be interested. And since then, millions of people have hit the site. We have about 30,
fantastic.
We have about 35,000 subscribers and readers in 190 countries. And it's the largest of its kind that I'm aware of on the topic.
Well, I first learned about it through a former student of mine, sort of a revert to the church, and she was getting one of your emails every day.
Wonderful.
That's great. And tell us about the Avila Institute, or Avila. How do you say it?
It's Avila, as in Teresa of Avila, or Avila in Spain.
Right.
What happened is we were providing a lot of good content on the website. We started to do little webinars to explain spiritual topics, and that was, requested of us by our readers. And then I thought, I had this idea of in about 10 years or so, this was in 2013, I thought in 10 years, I want to create a school like the Teresianum in Rome, but for our time, and that would be not limited by location, but we could do it on the internet. And I talked with a gentleman that I was working on a book with at the time, who is probably, in my opinion, the best spiritual theologian in our time. His name is Dr. Anthony Lillis.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, in 10 years, I want to start this school. And he said, I think we should do it now. And I said, I have a bunch of money that my first book, Navigating the Interior Life, sold very well, and I donated all that money to a nonprofit to serve the faithful poor who don't have access to materials. But I didn't really know how I was going to do it. I just had the money that I knew I didn't want to buy a new car with or whatever. And so once he said, let's do it, now I knew why I had the money. And so in 2013, we launched with 58 students. And they were all Americans, I think. And since then, we've served a lot more than that, and we have students in 48 countries around the world, priests, religious, and lay.
That's wonderful. And what can you study at the Avila Institute?
There are two basic tracks. One is the graduate certificate in spiritual theology, so it's a rigorous graduate study program in spiritual theology. And the second is called the School of Spiritual Formation, which is really designed for people who are very busy and can't spend 3 hours outside of the classroom for every 1 hour in, but instead can do something like an hour-to-hour ratio, but who are looking to grow spiritually. And so it's basically easier than even undergraduate work and far less expensive to help actually we've had priests, religious laity, all of those courses too. So it just depends on how much time you have.
And so it's an opportunity to learn about the thought of the great teachers in the Catholic tradition about how a person grows in holiness. Is that right?
It's exactly right. It's really the wisdom of the saints. So we cover the saints of East and West. We cover, Benedictine, Carmelites, Franciscan, all of the major gifts that God's given to the church and the major religious streams of religious thought within Catholicism. We provide insight into all of them in a kind of systematic way.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. And you can go, if any of our readers are interested, listeners are interested, they're online, the Avila Institute.
Yeah, you can go to avila-institute.com.
Okay, thank you. Now, you have any other projects that I don't know about?
Well, I have published 7 books on faithful Catholic spirituality with 2 different publishers. The latest you will be talking about today, and then we also have Into the Deep parish events. So I travel around the country most months, giving half-day kind of semi-retreat about how people can really deepen their prayer lives.
That's great. Now, Dan, you're married, and how many children do you have?
I have 4 children.
And are they grown now?
I'm pretty close to being an empty nester. My oldest son just got engaged, and he's a police officer here in Birmingham. And then I have a daughter in graduate school and a son who will be at Catholic University of America this next semester. So I'm just about, they're at the very edge of the nest and flapping their wings to get ready to jump.
Right. I remember I met Dan and his wife at a retreat in Birmingham, Alabama, that was organized by the Sister Servants of the Eternal Word. Dan was giving the retreat, and I came away with the impression that you had a very happy family, and I was very impressed, and I had a feeling that was connected to your prayer life.
Oh yeah, I mean, my wife is a dream. She has a very committed prayer life herself. She's very holy, and all of our kids are in the faith, and so it's really a gift to have this kind of family situation that allows me actually to do a lot more than we were dealing with the typical crises that a lot of families suffer with.
Right. Now, so you, however, I hope it's okay to say this, from the retreat, I know you didn't have an easy childhood yourself.
No.
And you're a convert to the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
Can you tell us a little bit about how you became a Catholic? And
but basically, I'm Jewish, and I'm still Jewish. I'm I guess technically a Hebrew Catholic. I came to Christ out of despair in my early 20s because of physical, emotional, and spiritual trauma, I guess, of my childhood. It's kind of a long story, but I came to the conclusion that I needed to find a reason for suffering, or I wasn't going to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And I cried out to God, and He answered and blessed me by revealing Himself to me and giving me a reason to live and a beautiful mission to live in serving Him and the church. My perception of Catholicism was very negative. My stepfather, in between beating my mother into an emergency room and firing a gun in our home, attempted to convince me the Catholic Church was the one true faith, which, as you might expect, was not very effective. Right. And
so the last thing you would ever become would be a Catholic after that.
That is where my head was at, for sure. So when I became a Christian, I became a Southern Baptist, and so I had a negative taste in my mouth about that, Catholics. But I'm very studious, and I struggled with the constant conflicts in Protestantism, the lack of unity, the lack of any sort of cohesive thought about how to interpret Scripture or how to live the faith, and eventually started reading the Apostolic Fathers, and that led me to the Catholic Church. I did a pit stop in Orthodoxy and Anglicanism because there's no way I was going to become Catholic. But God had other plans and led me into His church, and I'm grateful. I've been a Catholic since 2005.
Okay, and so, okay, all right, and so was your wife a Catholic, or did you two of you come into the church together?
Well, I wasn't married when I became Catholic.
Okay.
And I was actually considering the priesthood. I was a seminarian. I was an Anglican seminarian, essentially, when I became Catholic, although I left the seminary, obviously. And I had discerned the priesthood briefly and determined that I was called to be married. And so I knew that I wanted to have a Christ-centered home, and God eventually led me to Stephanie, which I was grateful for.
Well, again, having met your wife, and I don't know you well, but I did gather that you had a pretty happy family, and to me that's such a beautiful, testimony of how getting close to God can enable us to overcome so many things from our past.
Yeah, it is true. I don't want to present it as if we don't have troubles. We obviously do. We're all humans, and we have ups and downs.
Right.
But I had been through a divorce when I was a Protestant, and there was a great deal of suffering related to that situation. And I didn't, when I became Catholic, when you become Catholic, you realize there's only really one marriage. There's only really truly one real wedding, if you will, one sacramental reality. And so I took that very seriously, and I asked the Lord to bring me a woman. Actually, I had an altar in my house, in my apartment, and I had one chair, and I had, a prayer altar when I was in seminary. Once I determined I was to be married, I put another chair right next to it. I put a reserve sign on the chair.
Oh. That's so lovely.
But it was so central because I asked God, I said, please send me a woman who will give everything of her to you and who will fill this chair always willingly. And to this day, she's never said no to prayer and never said no to anything related to the church. And,
yes.
That has a powerful impact on your kids and everyone around you.
Absolutely. Okay, well, so when did you? So I guess you started getting interested in the spiritual life before you became a Catholic. So, maybe in your Anglican or Orthodox phases, were you reading the saints?
As a Protestant, it actually was one of the things that brought me into the Catholic Church, because I had a very powerful encounter with Christ, and he changed my life. I mean, literally. And so I then entered into this reality of living relationship with God, but then began to experience all the normal problems that occur in that relationship, like aridity in prayer and so on. But in the
Protestant not knowing how to pray, right?
Exactly. So in the Protestant tradition, the spiritual theology in Protestant tradition is a mile wide and an inch deep, you know. So I ran into a book by a good Protestant man who compiled a bunch of writings from mystics from the Catholic Church, and he de-Catholicized them. So he instead of Saint Teresa of Avila, I think it was Teresa de Ahumada, you know, her name before her profession. And so I began to read those and eventually discovered they were all Catholic. And so I began to read Catholic mystical theology, discovered, Teresa of Avila's writings and, her more broad writings, and really realized through Teresa came to have a clear understanding that I wasn't crazy, and that there was this beautiful path that the Lord had for me and for all. And
when you say you came to realize that you weren't crazy, you mean that your desire to be close to God was fulfillable. Is that what you mean?
That's a good way of saying it. I had also had some experiences with God that I couldn't explain. So I'm not saying that I was levitating or anything, and then found her, but God,
you had He let you know he was there. Yeah.
Yeah. John 14 says that if we live in this covenant love relationship with him, that he will manifest himself to us, that he will abide with us. And I had some experience of that reality. And of course, she had a profound experience of that reality, and it helped me to realize I wasn't just making stuff up in my head.
And you were having those experiences as a Protestant?
To some degree as a Protestant, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so very interesting. So now I believe you wrote your latest book, Into the Deep, when Matthew Kelly, the great evangelist and author of Rediscover Catholicism, came to you and asked you to write about a book about prayer that would not be intimidating. Is that right?
It is, yeah. It was, the commission was write a book about prayer that we could really give to anybody in a parish, from the person who has never started a mental prayer practice to the person who may have tried and struggled, or to the person who has done some of it successfully but needed to know where to go next, and to do it without a lot of Latin words and things that can scare people away who are maybe just not of that disposition. And so I wrote this. We just published it recently, and it's receiving quite broad. I get a lot of notes of appreciation, a lot of encouragement from the readers that it's very practical, it's very not intimidating at all, and very very helpful to them in deepening their prayer lives.
Now, in his foreword to your book, Matthew Kelly says that prayer is difficult, joyful, challenging, and life-changing, and the battle to learn to be faithful in prayer is worth every ounce of effort that you can give it. It's worth everything you own. Now, why is prayer so important?
Well, because the answer, I think, is best illustrated between a husband and wife. Why is it important that a husband and wife talk to one another? And it seems so fundamental and almost absurd. But if you dig into that analogy and say, what would it be like if a husband and wife never talked? The likelihood is they would grow apart, and it would do damage to their relationship, and that relationship would deteriorate and eventually dissolve.
Right.
So in the same way, God has called us to communion with Him. He, since the beginning of our creation, we've been invited, the Catechism says in number 27, we've been invited to converse with Him. And we cannot come to find peace in this life. We cannot come to find fulfillment in this life until we've given ourselves over to this reality of our need to be one with Him and answer that call to be one with Him. And so prayer, the sacraments are foundational. The next most important thing beyond the sacraments to a healthy spiritual life is mental prayer.
Yeah, well, I heard, the Second Vatican Council says that we're all called to holiness, all people. Yeah. And I heard an Opus Dei priest once say, and it made a big impression on me, that it is impossible to become a saint if you don't pray. That's one thing you know.
Yeah.
And not only that, I mean, I think that without prayer, it's very difficult not to fall into serious sin.
Well, that's because you believe that because you're smart. St. Alphonsus Liguori says that he who prays shall certainly be saved. He who does not pray shall certainly be damned. And then in keeping with your comment, he says, short of a miracle, the man who does not practice mental prayer will end up in mortal sin. So the spiritual doctors of the Church understood this reality that prayer is necessary to help us stay on the narrow way.
Now, there's a Dominican spiritual writer, I guess he recently died, Jordan Oman, said that, he says, this is a quote from him, experience proves that there is absolutely nothing that can supply for the life of prayer, not even the daily reception of the Eucharist. There are many persons who receive communion every day, yet their spiritual life is mediocre and lukewarm. The reason is none other than the lack of mental prayer, either because they omit it entirely or they practice it in a mechanical and routine fashion.
Fascinating. Yeah, he was a great spiritual theologian and really understood and saw, both from his study of the teachings of the spiritual doctors of the Church and also his own experience, that those who don't practice mental prayer rarely grow spiritually. They regularly fall into sin. They regularly fall off the path. And there's, as he said, there's no substitute for this kind of intimacy with God.
Right, and in a minute I'm going to ask you about mental prayer, because I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering what that is. But remember that Jesus said in Luke, when Martha complains to him that her sister Mary isn't helping, and instead she's listening to Jesus, Jesus says that she's chosen the one thing necessary.
Yeah.
And so prayer is the one thing, he says it's the one thing necessary. Now, of course, he knows other things are necessary, like earning a living and feeding your children. But he meant by that prayer, he was trying to get our attention, and he was saying that prayer has top priority. It's the most important thing.
Yeah, it is. Prayer is let's just use a general term or a general idea of intimacy with God, as expressed with time, face to face with Him, is of the utmost of importance. And if we get that right, we can be much more certain that we're on the right path for everything else. But without that relationship, we can do what Martha did and serve diligently and be concerned about things that matters of the church. And we can end up in the scenario that Matthew 7:22 reveals, that where Jesus says that people acknowledged Him as Lord. They were faithful. They did things in His name. They did these great things. And in the end, He said, "Depart from me, I never knew you." And the Greek word for "new" is the same word the Jewish translation of the Old Testament, or the same word the Jews used to translate the Old Testament from Hebrew to Greek, when it says that Adam knew Eve. And so what Jesus is speaking of here is a kind of intimacy. Of course, it's not sexual, but it's certainly profound and distinct, but a kind of intimacy that is life-giving, and that in a sense results in new life. In a man and a woman, it results in new life in children, but with a person to God, it results in new life in the soul. It results in our ability to see His will and to respond to His call and to hear His voice, and in ways that nothing else, as Father Allman reveals, can give us.
So
Mary
we
and
were
Dan, Mary, Dan. This is Bob. I have a question. I haven't read your book yet, but do you cover the importance of husband and wife praying together?
No, I don't have that in the book, but I do promote it. Of course, my wife and I pray together every day, almost without fail, unless I'm not in town. And I think, and we pray the Liturgy of the Hours together, which is vocal prayer is a really effective way to pray with your spouse as a Catholic. But it's part of the intimacy that we share together, and which helps us to be, I think, better spouses, better parents, etc.
Well, I wanted to run something past you because I worked with a priest, and I did work with a priest in Cincinnati, Father Al Lauer, who's passed away now. But he always said, if husband and wife can pray together on a regular basis, he said it's like spending 4 years in the seminary. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, obviously he understands the power of prayer with husband and wife. It's similar to what we've been talking about here with God, and what Father Ramon said about the necessity of prayer, what St. Alphonsus Liguori says. When we give ourselves to that kind of Godward intimacy together, I think that the sacramental reality of marriage blossoms and is played out. And so there are many ways that the sacramental graces of marriage come. Some is through marital intimacy, but other in the sense of the procreative and unitive aspect of physical intimacy. But there's also spiritual intimacy and serving one another and helping one another to heaven. And all of those activities, all of those orientations bring with them the fullness of God into the soul, and where we can be more like Christ. When we're more like Christ, we're going to love one another more selflessly and more effectively, with greater wisdom. So prayer with your spouse is always. There's no marriage should be without it. If you want a healthy Christian marriage, you've got to pray together.
Before I leave, Mary, I want to also, you talked about your conversion from Judaism, and you know Dr. Rhonda Chervin.
I have met Dr. Chervin several times. I doubt she remembers me, but I've also read some of her works.
Well, it was interesting. It was about 2 or 3 weeks ago that we had a very interesting conversation between myself, Dr. Rhonda, and Dr. Anthony on this radio station, because you see, Rhonda and Sebastian Mahfoud are the owners of this station, and it was interesting to find out at that time about the Avila Institute, and I have an idea that maybe you're going to be seeing Rhonda once in a while, because she's retired now from Holy Apostles here in Cromwell, and is probably going to go on the road maybe a few times with you guys.
Well, that would be fantastic. And I think you're talking about Dr. Anthony Lillis, right?
Yes, right.
He's the academic dean of the Avila Institute, and well, any time with Rhonda, of course, as you know, is good time. So.
Right, exactly.
Okay,
so shoot that in there. Okay, go ahead, Mary.
All right, we had been talking. We mentioned the term a few times, mental prayer, and I don't want to get into that too much, but the discovery prayer, Dan, that you teach about in your book, Into the Deep, is a kind of mental prayer. It's the oldest kind, isn't it? And it comes from a very highly regarded tradition. In fact, you say in your book it may even go back to the times of the ancient Jews. Yeah. And anyway, would you tell us about discovery prayer and why you've given it this name?
Well, it is, of course, just a modern name for a kind of and a certain approach to Lectio Divina, which is divine reading. Lectio Divina was codified by a monk named Guigo, and really, I think, probably popularized from that point more, I think, around 1,000 years ago. But as you noted, the practice preceded him in some form. But basically, the idea of discovery prayer, and even the name, implies that you're going to discover something when you approach prayer in this way. And of course, what we are going to discover in this kind of prayer is Jesus himself, and understanding and engaging with him in and through Scripture, using this ancient approach to prayer. And it's a simple multi-step method. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. I should have memorized that, but I just had to be sure. But it's reading, reflecting, responding, resting, and then resolving. The reading aspect is simply a leisurely but spiritually attentive reading of the gospel passages, and repeating sometimes passages over and over until we really are able to draw ourselves in. Reflecting, which is the prayerful engagement with the meaning of the passage and how it might apply to my life circumstances. Responding is simply conversing with God about what I'm reading. Resting is really a secret to the power of this prayer to prepare you for contemplation. But resting really is what happens when the theological virtues rise in your heart as you're engaged with Christ in Scripture, and so it affects your soul. And you have a sensory kind of awareness of that. And so when that happens, you allow God to draw you into whatever reality he's trying to teach you, and you yield to that and rest. And then the resolving is the last step, which is just making sure that you don't, making sure that you, that encounter with God moves into your day in some way by by writing a thought down, or Saint Francis de Sales talked about it as if you were walking through a beautiful garden and a flower catches your eye. You pick that flower and take it with you into the day, so that your prayer extends into the day. So that's a summary of the approach.
All right, great. Why don't we go through them slowly, a little more slowly? But
sure.
Now I wanted to do a quick overview, so that's good. But first of all, you say there are 3 essential elements for making progress at prayer.
Sure.
You want to tell us about those?
Right. So a lot of my work in spiritual theology it's just because of the way I think is trying to uncover patterns that are common in the saints and in the lives of people who've made significant spiritual progress. And there are 3 elements that I've identified that exist in the lives of every saint that I'm aware of, and every single person that I know, or most people that I know, I should say, who have made progress spiritually. The first one is sacred space, and that element is when you have a particular place in your home that you pray, where you pray that you use for nothing else. You might have an icon or candles or whatever. But having a sacred space has a similar effect on the soul as walking into a beautiful church does, where it draws you to prayer, and it essentially trains your heart and your mind that when you use this space, all I do is pray.
Yeah.
So that's sacred space. You want me to continue
you point out
the others?
You said you don't need a lot of room for that. I have a little table. It's probably only about 1.5 feet wide between the end of my bed and my desk. And on that little table, I have a statue of the Blessed Mother and some icons and of our Lord. And that's where I pray, in front of that little table.
Yeah, and my first altar was a icon of Jesus and Mary with a candle, and it took up all of about 6 square inches, or maybe 1 square foot in total,
Yeah.
And then there was the something I sat on, or in a place where I kneeled. So it can take up at most a few square feet. So now currently in my house, my wife has an altar, and so do I. And my altar takes up a bit more space than that, and it's a little bit more elaborate. For Advent, I have, a nativity scene. But I have a crucifix and icons and relics and things like that. But to start with a sacred space, all you need is something, it can just be an icon of Jesus and a candle.
Right.
Just something that you use to help you to focus your time of prayer.
Okay, great. All right, and then tell us about the other 2 elements.
The second one is sacred time. And we've lost a bit of this idea of the sacred, and it really causes problems when we come to prayer. But essentially, if you were to give a $100 donation to a homeless shelter, that gift is in a sense sacred. That $100 is now theirs to use to feed somebody else. But if you look down at your sneakers the next day and realize that your Nikes weren't looking so good, and you went back to the homeless shelter and said, "Hey, I need my $100 back because my shoes aren't looking so good," the look you would get would be quite interesting. And most people would be aghast at the idea. Well, the reason is because that gift you gave should never be taken back. So it is in prayer that we should be, the way that we should think about time in prayer is if we dedicate 15 minutes a day to God, we should set a very specific time, like it's always 6 to 6:15, let's say, in the morning. And we should never take that time back. Just like we give the gift to the homeless shelter, we should never give that time that we've dedicated to God. We should never take it back from God.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do, I take that to confession when I do that. So sacred time is another secret of those who have deep prayer lives. They dedicate the time, and they always show up every day.
Right. Although, as you point out in your book, even though more may be better, 10 or 15 minutes is enough, at least to start, right? Yeah.
It really is.
If you're very, very busy, and that's all you can do, that will do.
Yeah, and once you do that for a few months, you're going to get hooked. And if you get the right formation after that, you're going to be you'll naturally attempt to expand that time, and because it is beautiful to spend time with the Lord. But yeah, 10 minutes is all you really need to start.
Okay. I know for myself, I bumped it up every 5 or years maybe by an extra 5 minutes, but I started pretty slow. I think Opus Dei tells people to pray for 10 minutes a day. So, obviously, if you can give more, that's good. But, there are people who are raising children and working, and if that's all they have, that's sufficient. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So then,
it really is.
And then, the third step you said was sort of finding the right posture and trying to pay attention to keep your focus on God, right?
Yeah, the posture is not so important, other than it helps you to, if laying down flat in your bed you fall asleep every time, obviously sitting up is a better thing.
That's not a good idea, right?
Right.
Okay.
So sacred attention is really about learning to fill your mind with God, and the 5 steps I mentioned earlier of discovery prayer is probably the best way to fill your mind with God. But sacred attention is just saying that if I've given God 15 minutes, I'm not going to turn my attention away from Him during that time willfully, because I've committed that time to Him, and it's sacred.
Right.
So it's not just showing up and spending the time, but it's also making sure that you keep your mind as best you can focused on God.
Okay. So let's go through those 5 steps a little more slowly. You said step 1 is reading. And how long? So you recommend in your book that we take a passage from the Gospels.
Yeah. The reason is because all of our spiritual growth is going to come through knowing and loving Christ and following Christ. And so the Gospels is the most important place for us to understand and engage with the reality of His person and work. And as far as the passage to pick, you can just go from beginning to end on one of the Gospels, and it doesn't mean that every day that you read a passage slowly that fireworks are going to go off and you're going to be levitating, because of what you read. But it's very likely that if you practice this very slow, deliberate reading, leisurely reading, you're going to come to insights that you never had seen before or noticed or considered before that will draw your heart to God. The secret is reading very slowly. And I often read, when I practice Lectio Divina, I'll read the passage out loud. And I'll even try to pause after each word if it's not too awkward, just so that I'm really absorbing exactly what the word means. Because if you read at a normal pace, you're likely to miss some of the depth that is there, or the context, or things that God is trying to draw our attention to. You can't read prayerfully or attentively to God at a high speed, if that makes sense.
Right. And how long should the passage be that you choose? Are we talking about a paragraph or?
Yeah, it can be as long as you want it. It can be as long or as short as you want it to be. Of course, if you're practicing mental prayer for a half hour, you can cover longer territory. But really, I found the most helpful thing is just to allow the text to lead you. So, as an example, if you come across a passage that has you kind of enraptured in conversation and thought with God, and it only took you a few words into it, then you should just stop and engage those few words. If it takes you 20 words before you hit something like that, then you should read 20. The key is to not try to get through anything, to not try to conquer an entire paragraph or an entire sentence. What we're looking for is encountering God and engaging with Him. We're not looking to get through anything.
Okay. So in your book you mentioned you recommend reading the passage out loud very slowly, at least 3 times.
Right. So what that looks like in a simple way is that when you come to something that is meaningful to you, you want to try to engage with it as deeply as you possibly can. So, for instance, I couldn't imagine anyone reading the genealogies 3 times over. So we have to be practical. But if you're reading, for instance, about the woman in Luke chapter 40, or Luke chapter 8, verses 43, it says this, and this is how I would read it in Lectio Divina. It says, "And a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years had spent all her living upon physicians." So I might read that sentence over and over again to try to really capture this profound suffering of this woman. The story about her is here for a reason, and it's here for me as much as it is for anyone else. And so I can imagine the anguish of this woman, and I might think about what it would be to be sick for that long and to constantly be bleeding and to spend all your money on physicians and to find no care. And then it goes on and says, "and could not be healed by anyone." What would that mean? Well, she would be in despair, right? I mean, if you can't be healed and you spend everything you have, and then it says that she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. And so, as I read that, I might consider what she looked like as she walked up behind Jesus. I imagine she would do it gently, but with some manner of desperation, desiring to be healed. And I can think about her, what she might be going through. This is the Messiah. I've heard He's healed other people. Can He heal me? If I could only touch the hem of His garment, as she reaches out. So, and then she touches Him, and Jesus, of course, recognizes that He's been touched by someone who's suffering profoundly, and He turns and engages her. Well, what was that all like? If you just read it quickly, you'll never get through all of those beautiful elements of even your own ability to look Jesus in the eye, as you are the one who needs to be healed from sin, and you are the one who struggled to be free from sin, and you just want to touch Him, and He turns and looks at you, and says, what do you need from me, or what? I don't remember what the passage says, but that's just an example of how you might do that.
Okay, that's beautiful.
Well,
Thank you.
Mary and Dan, I think we're reaching the end here. I know you wanted to cover all those 5 points, but I think people are going to have to get the book.
Okay.
And find out more about Discovery Prayer that way. So,
and the book is Into the Deep by Dan Burke.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so let's close.
Okay. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very grateful, and you're doing wonderful work. And we're grateful to you for being with us today.
Well, it's been fun, and I appreciate you letting me talk to your listeners about this important work.
Okay.
Next week, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Mary. And next week, we'll be talking more about some of the other things that Mary would like to be doing on this program, which, as we said in the opening, is Rivers of Living Water, a show on how to grow in holiness and have an intimate relationship with God. Jesus said in John chapter 7, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink, and out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. And you have some other things, too, that describe the program there, if you have them with you, Mary.
Yeah, we'll be looking at the virtues we need to grow in and the sins we need to overcome, and how we can grow in this relation, how we can really truly have God in our lives.
It was a wonderful program. I congratulate you, and certainly a wonderful contribution by Dan Burke. And we'll see you again next week, same time, same station. And we'll be on at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on WCAT Radio. We pray this everything, and we say God bless each and every one of you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.